find the right destinations. You're also a white label OTT. So again, how do you choose the content creators? At least from your content aggregation platform, how do you choose that, well, this creator will make the cut and this won't?
So actually we use a lot of AI more for recommendation and for suggestion. So less for the creative part, because I don't think the AI can really drive the creative process, right? Creative process, you still need that artistic. It's the difference between art and science. But in terms of what to create and what the users are, I think that's more and more data driven. I mean, if you look at the top platforms today in the marketplace that are going at content, and I'm specifically talking more North American market, who are the guys that are media now? It's Amazon, it's Netflix, it's Facebook, it's Google, right? And these are all guys that control data, they control users. And so, I mean, if you look at Netflix this year, they actually saw data that stand-up comedy was a very big piece. So what did they do? They spent $500 million and signed all the stand-up comedians. And so this year, they have an exclusive of stand-up comedians, and you cannot get it on any other platform. And what's driving that is driven by the data, because their data is saying that at least their audience is looking at stand-up comedians and looking at that. So I think that drives more of recommendation, but it's also have to be careful with kind of the recommendation, because that's how in the US we got Trump elected, right? This fake news or real news, or however you want to call it, is also driven by AI, and being careful with that, because essentially this fake news is about these echo chambers, and these echo chambers about, oh, if this guy likes guns, then I'm going to keep suggesting gun content to him, and that's going to reinforce, and his friends like guns, but that just reinforces something that he's thinking about, and therefore this is really something that has been driving. So data is there, and it's in the underpinning, so we have to be careful and use it responsibly. But data is really driving maybe not the creation of content, but really the suggestion and the recommendation of that. And we see that a lot because we work with a lot of TV stations and media companies, and we incorporate a lot of AI in what we do. But we're going in, like, for example, scanning videos, scanning it for different things like face and image and text and audio, so that we can get the context. And then from there we can figure out, oh, users watching that, and what do they seem to gravitate to within the content, and not just the overall piece itself. Because the overall piece might be, let's say, a romantic comedy, but they seem to be very interested in specifically the supporting actress, right? And at these time slots, right? So there we can infer that there might be special interest from there versus the overall story, right? And that's insights that we can give to both the platform and the creators as kind of ingredients for the creative process, but not necessarily tell them what they should create. Like, they still have to come up with that themselves.
So are there any instances where content has got rejected before it even came on your platform because, your analysis said so? Or is it all in the hindsight that, okay, great, this is working, this is not working?
For us, it's still in hindsight. I mean, we kind of choose who we work with, and we specifically pick categories of genres, right? And so in general, if we pick a category, let's say it's news, right? That's a general category, right? But within that platform, then we figure out, and all users are different because we're in 20 plus countries. So the usage here in India is not the same as the usage, let's say, in China, and not the same as the US, and there are different things. And the consumer is different based on the culture, based on user behavior. And so a lot of times we still go in with a blank slate, and we use data and intelligence to figure out over time, what is the best to actually recommend to the users. But we do see that if we recommend, the uplift is quite dramatic. So data is driven into kind of that platform choice. And that gives insight that they can go back to the creators to kind of give them a framework of what works and what doesn't, right? But we can't really get into that creative process. I think you still need artists for that.
Gaurav, so being at the center of between brand and content. Uh, you have people coming and making pitches nearly every day, right? So from a content lens, what are the 2 or 3 things that you bet on, saying that okay, let me, and you have answered this question partly when we spoke about the earlier case studies, but there's a massive project, or it could be a feature film, or it could be anything, right? And somebody is really looking at you partnering, right? What is something beyond just the audiences that it can appeal to, would you be looking at from an insights perspective?
So Devin, I'll just step back with one story. It just came to me while we were talking. This story is about a friend of mine who was an ITN and essentially left corporate that and left all that to get into palmistry. And I found it the most weird career choice ever. And he just left a very cushy job in the US, came back to India and settled down in Roorkee, a small town. And I went and met him. His father told me to speak sense to him. He's giving up all that is opening. And a brilliant guy. So I went and met him and I said, listen, what's wrong with you? Why are you doing this? So don't you understand this pure quackery? There's no science to it. And he told me something that stayed with me for a long time. He said, listen, many years back, people would say any pharmacist was essentially a quack. And that's where the word quack comes from. Because you're betting on possibly non-science to come to a cure.
Yeah.
His belief was that there are only good doctors and bad doctors, and good pharmacists and bad pharmacists. Right? Ultimately, it's about the science behind that pharmacy that's very important. And that, again, the second story that comes to mind is something that a guy who, one of the guys who came in to sell a trucking space to me, and he said it was 5 times the cost of what it normally is. And I said, what's wrong with you? Why are you charging me this much? The truck costs this much, the labor is this much, total cost is 2 lakh rupees. You're saying 10 lakh rupees. It doesn't make sense to me. And he said, I'm not charging for the truck, I'm not charging you for the labor. I'm charging for that, it's like the story of the diamond and the hammer and the chisel. I'm not charging for the hammer and chisel, I'm charging for a way do I strike with that hammer and chisel. For me, that becomes the factor of deciding which content partners you work with. And I'll tell you how it manifests itself of how people, very interesting, Baron Sharp in his book, How Brands Grow, says a very interesting phrase. It says, listen, there are laws to marketing. Around 5 years back, people thought there were no laws to marketing. Right? Everybody would be a marketer and there was a certain nuance to it which made somebody successful, somebody not. But ultimately, this is an institute out of Australia which worked on very large piece of data to arrive at this piece to say, listen, actually it's as much science as there is in architecture. That you can only building upwards and there has to be in certain fashion the laws of gravity take over. And they essentially build it down to 2 things that really matter in building brands. One is mental reach, other is physical reach. And they spend 10 years and years on trying to go to every company in the world to try to sell that project. And people essentially rubbished it, saying that it's absolute nonsense. Because people said that, listen, there's no, there's so many examples that things work without physical reach and mental reach. By the way, there's nothing on loyalty is what they said, but essentially, or Baron Sharp said there's nothing called loyalty in brands. But there were examples of Apple. Then they went into the data to really show that Apple users are as disloyal, so to say, as any other user, and that data proves it, right? And now, over the last 15 years, they come to a space where now they get more years into boardrooms than any time in the past. The large point being that I think just to collect all the 3 stories together into one narrative that I believe in, how do I look at content, is that the answer lies in possibly finding that great doctor, oblique pharmacist, oblique a marketer in content building. And those guys seem to get those pieces right more often than not. Right? And they get it right because perhaps through, like the book Blink project, through over years of practice on that, you come to a solution which is not put pen down. It's not something that they're written, but they perhaps it's intuition and perhaps somebody else's data led. But there is a science that allows you to be more successful than many other content creators. So that becomes the first thing. For me, there are 3 things that when I'm looking at what's your past piece of work or whatever. And it is amazing that it's almost algorithmic of how more often than not some branded content creators seem to get branded content right every time. They will know a lot of those guys. Right? They come in, and they would be able to tell you that, listen, this piece of paper works. And by the way, it works all the time for advertising. So you can bulky, you can any of the market brothers. You know that there is certain human truth and relatability that comes out of it. Perhaps down under all these pieces lies something called a human element, which is almost predictable in a sense, which is almost to say that it is so core to us. It's like the primary colors. You take those 4 colors and you can make any color in the world. Perhaps there is a mixture which only a master mixer knows how to mix it. And that's the X factor. And for me, the very interesting story is we were talking before. So Joseph Campbell finished a piece of research in the early 1990s, started off in 1850s, 1860s.
Gauravji, can you speak in the mic?
I'm sorry. Have we not speaking in the mic all this while?
Yeah, you have
Okay.
not.
Then should I repeat? Okay. No, we won't. So I think really sorry for that. But I think the other piece was this thing that Joseph Campbell essentially constructed something called a monomyth. And what it talks about is the hero's journey. What it says is that I'll tell you the story, and a lot of people, and mostly in the room are Indians, would relate to at least 2 mythology stories that go exactly like this. It starts with this reluctant hero who doesn't want to be in that position at all. Gets banished from that empire or wherever they were, goes into exile for a long time, goes through a piece of self-discovery, and then wins a great war, comes back home triumphant. Right? How many stories in India do we relate to? So Ramayana, Mahabharata essentially follow that story. Interestingly, it goes 2 steps further. It says that actually there is also a human-like character in that person's life that comes along with that person. Let me tell you in Western stories where it resonates. So Star Wars, Chewbacca, I don't know how many people watch Star Wars. In Ramayana, Hanuman is one key example. Then it goes further. It says that 2 characters who essentially are comic or comic-like, but redeem themselves through the journey of the story. Wonder Woman, if you see those 2 characters, that Scottish soldier and the other one, are essentially that characters who redeem themselves as a part of the story. But that's Joseph Campbell's monomyth. And like we were discussing, perhaps there are just 7 myths like these that need to be cracked. And that would be the mathematical answer to it. Having said all that, the magic is the practitioner. It's what makes that X factor. X factor is the guy who knows where to strike that hammer for that diamond to cut exactly as per the scientific laws of cutting diamonds. And hence there is some data in it, and there's really deep mathematical data that drives human behavior. But then at the end of it is how's that doctor and how's that practitioner and how trained and how
Who's the goldsmith really well? Yeah, fair. So my next question actually is for both Samir and Majal, because you are at the forefront of a lot of creation. But I'll begin with you, Samir. So see, clearly you're creating in one way a lot of new pop culture, right? And that again means that there's some great content that's getting created. How do you unlock the true potential? Because there's a particular way in which content is pitched and it's consumed or it's sold. Advertisers also buy into it, right? But clearly you're doing what you're doing is because there's a much deeper reason. There could be deeper insights. It could be a underlying very strong pop culture, right? And which is why you have created something, right? But how do you really unlock the true potential or the true value of that when you're pitching to someone?
Okay, so usually by the time we come to a pitch stage, to let's say someone like Gauravjit or yourself, we're at that stage, we've already done the discovery process of what is working. So, to Gauravjit's example of, you take a Palki or someone like that who's got it right several times, we are usually talking about people who have already established that they have that X factor, whom we might have discovered several months ago, a year ago, or maybe a few weeks ago. But we're able to prove how they stack up and how they're getting it right. So it's to extend that same example that he gave, we might all get the recipe to make a chocolate ganache cake, but one of us is the chef, and the chef is going to produce that cake with the same recipe that's going to taste infinitely better than what we might take a crack at it, right? So we figured out the chefs in those respective genres that we're talking about. And now the vehicle that might make sense from a brand safety guideline, from a mass reach, from a demo profile, etc., might be music in some case, it might be an automotive content piece, it might be a comedy piece, whatever it is. Then that becomes the execution piece. But we've already established why these people are the chefs in that space, or why they're the leaders, and how they're standing well above the other folks, and therefore they are engaging. I mean, we actually go a step further. Our fundamental belief is that in the online space there is now the emergence of a digital superstar, and a digital superstar actually has again, because it's not measured here, but if I go to a US metric, Variety Magazine does this research every year, and they found the top 50 influencers for US teens, number 1 to 6 were online stars. Taylor Swift and Bruno Mars with Uptown Funk came 7 and 8. And so in the top 20, there were about 14 of them who were online stars. Now, if you're a brand head and you're saying, I actually want to connect, their statistic was that the online superstars had 17 times more engagement than a traditional media star. And they were 7 times more engaging, and so on and so forth. So if you're really looking at engagement, because I feel TV and traditional mediums are for reach.
How would
and
you
digital is
define engagement? As in, it's just.